You've learned that the angle measure of an angle theta in radian measure is just the length of this arc divided by this radius. So theta is equal to the arc length divided by radius, and that gives you an angle measure for theta in radian mode. If you think about the angle measure for an entire circle, the angle measure will be the arc length, which in this case is simply the circumference, and the circumference of a circle is 2 pi r, divided by the radius, which is r. And so the radius will cancel, so we know that the angle of all the way around is 2 pi. And we also know that the angle all the way around is 360 degrees. And that is why there are 360 degrees in 2 pi radians, or if you divide both sides by 2, 180 degrees in pi radians. Now that we know there are 2 pi radians in one complete circle, if we only went halfway around the circle, we would have pi radians, or 180 degrees. If we only went a quarter of the way around the circle, that would be half of pi, or pi over 2 radians. And similarly, this would be 3 pi over 2 radians, because you can count each quadrant as pi over 2 radians. We could then split each of those quadrants equally into equal pieces, in which case if you think about this being pi, then this is cut into 4 pieces of pi, if you like. And so each one of them is pi over 4. Here's 1 pi over 4. Here's 2 pi over 4, which is pi over 2. Here's 3 pi over 4. That's in quadrant 2. Here's 4 pi over 4. And we got 5 pi over 4. 6 pi over 4, which is 3 pi over 2. 7 pi over 4. And 8 pi over 4, which is 2 pi. Suppose we cut our pi, which is 180 degrees, into 6 pieces. Now, if we cut it into 6 pieces, each one of those has to be how big? Each one has to be pi over 6 radians. So this one's pi over 6. If I go to here, I have 2 pi over 6, which is pi over 3. And 3 pi over 6, which is pi over 2. 4 pi over 6, which is 2 pi over 3. 5 pi over 6. 6 pi over 6. And then you can keep going, right? 7 pi over 6. 8 pi over 6, which is 4 pi over 3. 9 pi over 6. 10 pi over 6. 11 pi over 6. 12 pi over 6 is all the way around, which is the same as 2 pi. You may recall special angles from geometry class. We often were interested in 0, 30, 45, 60, and 90 degree angles because they have some nice features when you draw the right triangles. We'll be interested in that in radians as well, so it's good to know the relationship between the degrees and the radians of certain special angles. So 0 degrees is 0 radians. 30 degrees is pi over 6 radians, because pi has 180 degrees, and you're dividing it 6 ways. That makes 30 degrees. 45 is pi over 4 radians. 60, pi over 3 radians. And 90, pi over 2 radians. To the extent that you're familiar with these and can go back and forth between them, you'll be much better off.